Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. And I'm also very excited to be interviewing Kunal, someone whom I've known for a very long time. My goal is to ask all the tough questions to Kunal that no one else has ever asked. So let's see if we're able to do that. For this session, I'd actually like to focus on three topics. So, first, given the theme of the conference, we will focus on retail investing. Second, want to touch on entrepreneurship, especially since Kunal has started now two companies, work with a lot of founders. And I also think that is foundational for what drives the double digit growth for India. And third, want to touch on the Indian mentality and how can the government and macro factors uh, be more supportive to help drive the growth for India. I'll also try to make sure that we collect questions from the audience, so do feel free to submit that, and we'll try to do that in the last 10 minutes. But first, I'd like to get started with retail investing. I mean, we are sitting in the Thrive conference hosted by Groww, so I think we need to start with that topic. Kunal, you've talked a lot about financial independence. And I think in one of the recent tweets, you even said this, which is higher income may correlate to better skills, may or may not, but it does not correlate to high wealth. And I thought that was really interesting. So, can you elaborate on that a little bit? And what do you define as financial independence?
I think it's a great question to think, and I've been thinking a lot about it lately because I've seen an interesting behavior that, like credit cards, is what we've seen at CRED. That the people who revolve, I also always thought that the people who revolve are the people with lower affluence, right? You assume by design that people who are revolving are people who just don't have enough money or are spending more than what they earn. But I have seen no correlation to affluence and revolve behavior. It is there is no, in fact, all income levels are revolving at the same percentage levels. So that tells you an interesting pattern, that what is really going on. In fact, I met one of the fintech startup employee who was revolving, and I asked this person that, hey, you are revolving for the last 12 months, like why do you do that? And he's like, oh, I didn't know I'm revolving, I just was doing this. And this person's income is in the, like, literally the 0.1% income bracket. Like it's like 1 crore plus income person. And to me, just baffling to see this pattern again and again. And we have seen a similar pattern in how a lot of celebrities who have their, or sports people who do well, end up becoming poor and bankrupt because they do not have a good emotional control on how to take care of the wealth once they have earned the income, right? And it's an interesting thing that skills get you the income, but they do not create wealth. You need a lot of emotional control, and just like health, you need to work on it, and you need to have discipline to do things. Income does not, you cannot hack a wealth. You can probably hack income. You cannot hack wealth over a long period of time because it requires rigor. And when I say financial independence, is very simple. That what if the income from your wealth is more than what your income per hour is, right? To me, that is the best definition of financial independence. That if the money that you have makes more money than what you can make per hour, you have really freed up yourself from doing whatever you have to do, right? And that freedom is what gives you these amazing choices of doing whatever you want to do with life. You can be starting up, you can decide to take a sabbatical, you can do anything with yourself once you've kind of moved to that place where you've caused that. And I think I most people unfortunately get domesticated with monthly income. I've seen that. I remember going to Dubai once in this mall, and there is a shark tank in the mall, and I dived inside that, and you feed the sharks. And I was like, I asked the guy who was feeding, saying that, hey, how are these sharks, which are these ferocious animals, behaving like domesticated dogs? And the guy just gave one line answer: we give food at the same time every day.
Oh,
Now, this is a very interesting point to think about, that most of us in this world are like these sharks, that we are designed to do some wild things, but we are all domesticated by this monthly income that we expect every fixed time to come. and then never think about independence. We never think of becoming sharks again, right? We are becoming this timid, domesticated animals. And I'm kind of using crude language, but it's probably the better analogy to explain that financial independence is your ability to be wild again, to be able to do things that allows you to take risks and not worry about things, versus kind of constantly be in the zone of having a P&L mindset versus a balance sheet mindset, right? Like if you remain
Yeah.
P&L, you remain P&L. If you become balance sheet person, then you become balance sheet person.
Yeah, so I think you touch on two very interesting points. One is, you get the monthly income, and if you just put it in a savings account with a small yield, like it doesn't necessarily help you drive towards wealth creation. And second, it doesn't rapidly scale with time, which I get because especially, at Y Combinator, we often tell founders you have to pay attention to equity because if your company actually does work out, equity does scale exponentially. Time doesn't scale exponentially, right? But
Correct.
let me push on financial independence because you made a point around how in financial independence, basically, if you have enough wealth, you can take more risks. But by the very definition of most founders is they are not financially independent, and yet they're taking risks at 23. So how did you, I know that you say that you became financially independent at 16. Like, what does that even mean? And how should people think about risks? Do they take risks only when they're like, when they have enough wealth?
I became financially independent not from the lens of not have to worry about money, but more about not depending on family members to take care of me.
Mhm.
I was on my own. Like I would say, more self-sufficient than financially independent, in more contextually right way. But I think the addiction of somebody else taking care of you is a prison that you have to come out of, because if you start taking care of yourself as early as possible in your life, you get a chance to take more risk in life. And I think I actually encourage a lot of people to do startups in their college for three reasons. One, they will learn the elusive art of selling that most Indians have not learned, because we do not have an active dating culture. We do not know how to sell, right? And therefore, most Indians are stuck in trying to write DMs to people on Instagram. They're just saying hi, 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 hi. They have no second sentence to make, right? Because they have not learned the art to sell, right? The second thing is that they are probably going to learn more skills and more weaknesses about themselves than anything else in college will teach them. That you
Mhm.
suck at planning, you suck at leading, you suck at this, and then you know yourself a lot more, right? And therefore, I encourage that. And the third thing is that you will actually learn business and capitalism a lot more if you ever do your own business, right?
Mhm.
Versus the channel where you create this perpetual thing where you are hoping that skills will be taught after you come out of college and somebody in the job will teach you. What if you are a significantly better employee? Let's say your startup doesn't work in college, which is fine.
Yeah.
What if you become a significantly superior employee for the company you joined because you failed doing a startup? So, according to me, I know the journey of success is compulsory. You have to have 100 slaps in life. No matter what you want, you will have 100 slaps to become successful. My recommendation to people is always get them early, because getting
Mhm.
them late in life is going to be hard because you will not be able to handle that. So as early, and I think the more important thing is not externalizing. I've seen two types of founders: failed founders who never blame any external circumstances on why they failed, and founders who constantly say, oh, this investor, this co-founder, this person, this that. They are constantly protecting themselves by externalizing the blame. When you are the founder, the only reason the startup is failed is you.
Mhm. Yep, that's true. I mean, there's a whole team, but like at the end, the founder is definitely accountable
You
for
are
it. And I know
absolutely
you,
accountable.
yeah, and I think you make interesting observations. You talk about the dating culture, the lack of it. I think there's also the fact that I grew up in India, and we're not encouraged to work in school or college to pay through college, right? And I think the difference is if you have to take care of yourself, the disassociation from family for money really drives you to figure out how to save, and you see the hardship of money. I think I probably first learned that when I came to Virginia Tech from India. And I had to pay both my rent and cover all my living expenses. And it was honestly the first time I learned how hard it is to make ends meet. And I think it's very important for people earlier in life. And I do want to touch on skills in the second part of the conversation, because I know you've studied this a lot and you talk a lot about intellectual curiosity. But just to wrap up the retail investing topic. So, one of the things that I didn't know in my 20s, and I'm curious, you did because you started a company very young. Sam Altman from Y Combinator often said that one of the ways to become successful is you need to own something. You don't become successful by renting your time. You become successful by owning, and it could be owning an equity in a business, and it could be in infrastructure, natural resources, it could be anything, right? But equity is the one that really scales. Do you agree with that? And like, does that, if you agree with that, how do you tell all the young generation of Indians to think about that? Should they all go start startups, or what's your advice for their best for the best way for them to think about ownership and equity?
I think we are like, this is like really fast forward to think about equity. In India, 99% of people don't understand what is inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't understand inflation, they have no understanding of what compound interest is. And they don't know if they keep money in their account earning 3% when the country's inflation is at 6%, their wealth has actually deteriorated. They don't understand, because all of us grew with this mindset that parents told us save money. So everybody saved money instead of investing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So everybody has saving account, and India has tons of money lying around in saving account, earning 2% interest, right? Whereas even if you put money in a liquid mutual fund or whatever, you will earn actually a lot more than that. But the idea of being safe and save money keeps us in that particular manner, right? So my view is that the total number of hours anybody in India has got any financial literacy training is probably one or two for their entire life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their parents did not create wealth. Uh, and there is a lot of shame to discuss with friends about wealth, because it's almost like, according to me, financial literacy is very similar to sexual literacy, right? People do not find comfort in talking
Yeah.
about it. And in a patriarchal society, where you need a lot of status to appear to be like all cool and smart, asking about dumb questions is not appreciated. This is a country where
Mm-hmm.
asking dumb questions naturally makes people feel that you are dumb, but the only way you become smart is by asking dumb questions, right?
Yeah.
Because that's when somebody will teach you, right? Then you will find out what are the different ways to fight inflation, right? And what are the different
Yeah.
ways to make the compound interest work in your favor versus work against you, right? For example, if credit cards are charging you 50% interest rate in India, that's compound interest working against you, right? But let's say some equity fund is giving you, let's say, 10% return, that's in compound interest working in your favor, right? And I think
Correct.
understanding at financial literacy level is so poor and so basic. At CRED, we
Mm-hmm.
have like so many members who are above 750 with multiple credit cards. We did a recent survey, and we discovered that most people, 70-80% of them, think that their credit card interest is only 10% or 15%, which is not
Mm.
true. It is
Yeah.
50%. So the thing is that, and there is no correlation to academics, no correlation to IQ, no correlation to, it's just that this topic is never discussed. It's almost shameful to talk about money in India, right? Because it demonstrates weakness in some ways. So we are a society that is all pretending to be all cool, but we do not understand the concept of wealth. Unlike some business communities, right? So what I've seen is that, let's say, a lot of Gujarati families or Marwadi families or any other business families, one interesting pattern I have seen is that when you were a kid, did the parents teach you to think in percentages?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that to be the strongest correlation of people who understand things. A lot of other places, everything is spoken in absolute amounts, right?
Mm.
But if you grow up in a Gujarati or a Marwadi family, you always spoken in taka. Like taka is
Mm.
the thing that you have to learn. And an interesting thing I've observed is that in a typical Gujarati family, right, you could be academically smart, but if you do not understand money, you are called doba, which is a like a nasty word to tell a kid that you are like basically a dumb beep
Mm-hmm.
kind of a thing, right? So the thing is, shaming the right like understanding of money, right? When and we only say, oh, academics mein, oh, you got A's, into engineering and IIT. What if
Yeah.
you don't understand money? What if you don't understand how taka works? And we are extraordinary at algebra, terrible at money.
Correct. It's true. That is true. In fact, I feel like we spend so much time studying differential calculus and integral calculus, and like we don't use any of it. And honestly, like it would have been better if we were taught how to manage money from when we were young. Although, what do you think? Is it changing? What do you think needs to change? How do we make sure there is a change? Like India has, less than 2% retail investors. And do you think it's barriers to act? I mean, is it more like they didn't have access to financial markets? Well, some of it is that, but I do agree with you. Like we all grew up saying, you have to save 50% in savings, you invest the rest in gold. But how do we change this? Because clearly there is a pattern where this works, right? We see the developed markets, it works.
I think first is uh, introducing capitalism in our education system. We have no clue what capitalism is, right? We all of in India have MRP in the products, and we think it's a great idea. We don't understand it's actually bad for the country because you are standardizing one price. Like, and I think my biggest problem is to understand that can we create a culture where capitalism is taught, financial literacy is taught from school days, because we cannot really expect parents to teach when they don't know this themselves, right?
Mhm.
If you have sent kids to learn English when parents do not know English, why are we not teaching financial literacy? Because parents have not been taught these things, right? And just because they own a house doesn't mean they understand what equity means, right? And if you look at the data, the number of people who are investing in equity is so small. And in fact, it's so concentrated in business communities. Again, if you look at Gujarat and like 2, 3 other states where business communities exist, almost everybody's participating over there. And in some states, it just doesn't exist. So I think we are stuck on our relationship of with money is not a pleasant one. It is a one which is confused. It is one where we are really not sure if we should be having a relationship with money or not. And unless we break that, we are not going to become. So one of the things that most people don't understand about India is that we talk about our per capita income is $2,000, right? What most people don't talk about, probably our median is probably 600 or
Yeah.
700, right?
Hmm.
Therefore, averages are fooling most people, including founders and investors,
Hmm.
because only the top percent is compounding.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, although though, like what I have seen in the US, like financial literacy is not taught here either. But I'm hoping that platforms like Groww can increase access to retail investing, and hopefully that helps foster change. I want to, before I switch topics to younger Indians and advice for them, or in terms of entrepreneurship, one last. This is more a fun topic on retail investing. What do you think? What's your reaction to Wall Street bets? I mean, it was a shock in the US. They were able to fundamentally change the stock price of GameStop by accelerating demand. It was almost like a revolution, right? GameStop just happened to be the stock that they used to drive. But for the first time, you saw the retail investors drive that. And, there's lots of themes around one, the decentralization of finance has arrived, or democratizing. Look what Robinhood did in the US by democratizing investing. What are your reactions to that?
Uh, you can make humans do extraordinary things when you make them cooperate. And there is no better cooperation than cooperating for fun, right? If I launched a capability for you to invest 20% of your monthly income to see billionaires lose all their wealth, would you do it? Most people in every part of the world will do it just for the entertainment of it, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter what the investment principles are. It is very simply the idea of entertainment, right? And we are underestimating the power and joy of entertainment that money and gambling gives to people, right? Because the fluctuation, the variety, the news, that like basically I pressed one button on my side and the world is collapsing, right? And
Mhm.
that joy is entertainment. So I think we are confusing entertainment to investments because a lot of them are actually just getting entertained, and they know that most of the most likely to become zero, but it's okay for them because it's a lot more entertainment for them, right? So my view is that we are entering a world where uh, uh, we are entering a world where the world has so much of, let's say, surplus capital when nothing material can happen. And I'll tell you one thing, Anu, that when you are the smallest stack on the poker table, the
Yeah.
biggest joy you have is to go all in all the time.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Even if you do not have the cards, the
Yeah.
joy is to screw the table by behaving and showing a strong position, right? And we do that through lotteries, we do that through these kind of stocks that are likely to have volatile thing, or sometimes a lot of
Mhm.
people who have entered in crypto with no understanding of what crypto is. It's just that the excitement of it moving so much makes you feel alive in some ways, right? So I have noticed that the small stacks are always going to be doing aggressive behavior because they are so close to zero in life that it doesn't matter
Mhm.
if it becomes zero again.
Yeah, that's true. I also think the decentralization viewpoint was actually very powerful, which is you could create a revolution by just getting a group of people on Reddit to, support or not support a particular company. And I do think that, especially consumer stocks, for the longest time for consumer companies, they could never give a lot of their shares or get some of the consumers as the shareholders. And you're essentially changing that through retail investing. But I think the crypto and the decentralization revolution is something very interesting to see for the entire financial ecosystem.
So
Now I
I
want
think,
to switch.
sorry, Anu,
Yeah.
before you jump to the next topic, one of the things that I've seen that startups should do is very early on create some version of ESOP buyback. Now, what it does is it forces people to think what does ESOP's value is, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is that when the currency that you otherwise think is useless starts becoming money and
Yeah.
converts to money, then you start believing the rest of the currency is real, right?
Hmm.
But a lot of times founders do not create liquidity for their ESOPs, which creates the impression that this is useless. Like this is just paper and I need to
Yeah.
optimize my salary. So I think one advice I would give to early stage startups to create the culture of equity in them is to convert their ESOP into some cash, even if it's 5% of vested, 10% of vested,
Yeah.
it will become real for them.
No, that's a very important point. And I think, especially in India, there's probably more skepticism because we have not had that many exits yet, right? And I think it's just because it's a function of a young startup ecosystem versus the US. So the US, there's probably more sophistication around startup equity, but that's what US startups do. They do allow, after a certain point when they hit a certain scale, there is a regular tender offer, and your early employees, depending on the time you've been at the company, US. And it's a great, I mean, my hope is people see that as wealth creation too, right? Because when you give that much time to your startup and you see that the startup is accruing more value, that wealth also transfers to them. Okay, so let's move to the second topic. So the second topic, I know you've touched on this a lot, but I think one of the foundational elements for India's growth is entrepreneurship, and it's one way to meaningfully scale and have impact on pretty much any sector, right? As Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. And you became a founder at a very young age. So I'd like for you to address, is entrepreneurship for everyone? You mentioned that earlier that you would like everyone in college to start something. So what would your advice be? When should they start? Should everyone start? Or is there like a mental model you use on who should do it versus not?
So I think the mindset that we have not changed is that we're hoping that the government is going to create these millions and millions of jobs all the time, as if we are a socialist nation that will continue to just work that way. We have to understand the world has shifted to capitalism, and in capitalism, we need a large ratio of people creating jobs versus people who are seeking jobs because there are not enough jobs, right? And unless there are not enough entrepreneurs, there are not going to be enough jobs. And unless we start celebrating, right? For example, how many entrepreneurs have got, let's say, the highest civil honor in India versus, let's say, an artist or an actor, right? Like I know at least um, 20, 30 actors who have got the highest civil honor, right?
Mhm.
Versus how many entrepreneurs, how many startup entrepreneurs have got a civil honor. So what the thing is that I'll give you an example. I was once in Portugal and I I saw in a church there was a tombstone of one person inside the church. Usually it's outside the church, right? So I
Mhm.
asked them that why do you have this thing inside the church, and they're like, oh, this is of this famous explorer who traveled and discovered this and discovered that, right? And so basically what happened is the highest honor of being buried inside the church was given to people who explored and created wealth for the country.
Mhm.
Now suddenly everybody wanted to be an explorer in that country because they got the highest honor. Now let me ask a different question: that are we in a country where we give the highest honor to people who create the highest amount of jobs? For example, let's take a wildly crazy example. What if government decides that the vaccination prioritization is for the elderly and the next set is going to be only for job creators?
Mhm.
Suddenly you desire to be the job creator because you are treated in a priority order, right?
Mhm.
What if job creators are giving a separate queue at the airport, that if you are creating jobs you're going to get a separate queue at the airport to move faster? What I'm saying is that unless we create these markers of importance, we are always going to assume the importance based on what celebrities get the attention for or whatever that is. The problem is, unfortunately, Bollywood is a zero sum game.
Mhm.
500 people cannot be superstars, but I can tell you 5 million entrepreneurs can be millionaires.
Yeah. So no, that's why I was going to push back on your question, because if there are way more successful startups in India, and not just the founders, right? We just talked about ESOPs, and the employees also have enough equity. Don't you think the wealth creation over time will be a sign for people to realize? Because if you look back 20 years, right, the multinational companies moved to India. Like at that time, I remember Yahoo. This was like in 2001. Yahoo, Microsoft, Google, they were all just setting up their offices in India. And there was this huge rush from engineering colleges because they said, oh, look at the salary. It's 2 to 3x or even 5x what, the prior batch got. So don't you think that if the startup ecosystem matures and we have more and more successful startups, like the ones you're all building, don't you think that's enough? Do we need an honor?
Uh, I don't think we have the everything is about distribution, Anu, as you know, right?
Yeah,
Is the
that's true.
information getting distributed enough? One thing I've learned that what they say A16 did by content is that they sucked the deal flow because they were the ones on top of mind. What YC is doing the same. What Kunal Shah is subconsciously doing is that by his Twitter, that all the startup founders follow you, so the deal flow just comes to me, right? So the same way, distribution of this information is also important, right? If one guy became a billionaire in Bangalore and somewhere hidden in his house, you don't see his lifestyle and you don't see his life and what he did, it's not going to become inspirational, right? So unless the Netflix creates a documentary on all the startup founders and their journeys and how they became big and all of that stuff, it is not going to become the normal currency. But we know all the stories of how Amitabh Bachchan became big and how Shah Rukh Khan became big. How many people know what Sachin Bansal went through? How many people know about what was the journey of so many founders who've done extremely well for this country and created thousands of jobs? We don't even know about the early guys who built the cities of India, and we have no clue about entrepreneurs, right? The problem of that is that their stories need to be told. Their stories need to be told for more people to inspire to have that story, right? Our legends are still about the kings, and kings unfortunately came from monarchy, and we don't understand that we cannot just celebrate kings anymore. We need to celebrate entrepreneurs, and that is not happening. Unfortunately, entrepreneurship stories have come out are only about people doing scams and
Mm.
all that stuff. That's not entrepreneurship.
Or
Entrepreneurship is
negative unit economics.
yeah,
That's the only
all of
story
that.
about startup.
All of that. Like,
Yeah,
why are we
I
not
agree.
celebrating the bootstrap entrepreneurs like the founder of Zoho? Like, their story is so inspirational, right? Like,
Yeah.
why there is no content about their success?
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. And I think you're right that to inspire a whole generation, the next generation of future founders, we have to share the stories. And it's not that the journey is easy, right? The entrepreneurship journey is definitely hard. So let me ask you, so do you recommend that all young Indians try to be an entrepreneur?
I'm saying if you try to be an entrepreneur, the worst case scenario will be an extraordinary employee. So
Yeah.
I
Okay.
would highly
That,
encourage. I would highly
that
encourage.
that's a very good point. So let me ask you this. You work with a lot of young Indians. I mean, you have them at CRED yourself.
Yes.
What, what do you, I mean, how bullish are you on the next generation of Indians? Are you bullish?
Um, that's a tricky question. Uh, I'm,
Yeah, answer carefully.
I'm, I'm, I'm not bullish yet. But I'm in this country building. I have not left this country. Oh, I have had an exit. Now let me move to nice, cooler places with smart people around me. I have hope, and that's why I'm here. I just believe that we need a lot more awareness created through importance of skills, importance of awareness and understanding. And I think the biggest thing I've seen is that there is no critical thinking ever taught in our Indian schools, right? Everything is just conformist, like I've told you, just listen to it and accept it, right? And
Mhm.
we never question religion, we never question God, we never question why is this teacher right, why is this entrepreneur right. Everybody is waiting for orders, right? Like I have seen that no questions, no healthy debates are held in companies, and founders also act very authoritarian in India. And I have seen authoritarian founders do not really create extraordinary team members. They mostly raise pets, and that's not going to build your company. If you are building a unicorn, you need at least 10 people who can build $100 million company in your team, and that's when you will become a unicorn. If you are trying to build a $10 billion company, you need at least 20 people who can build a unicorn to become a $10 billion company. So I think the idea of leading, not as an authoritarian, and then we look at the stories of, let's say, Steve Jobs, and like, oh, he was an he was not. He was
He was not.
actually a guy who brought really good debates, and he just was more right, but he always took ideas from the people. And most people tend to not research anybody, right? Like, how many people have really researched Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg or anybody for that matter, right? Like, there is no curiosity to find out people's journey, that why did they get what they get. For example, I remember people telling me, oh, so Kunal, you have dropped out, so should we drop out? And I tell them the following, that there is a very high incidence of people with high IQ to not believe in God. But not believing in God will not make you high IQ. There are no connection to these things, right? So I think there is this need for shortcuts. I think the thing that I've learned about our country is there is this need for a shortcut. Like, just give me something that will make me go there faster. Like, we're looking for mantras, right? But there are no mantras. You have to go through the journey.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And in fact, from my own growing up, I'd say, like, you're often taught or raised saying education is your job security, and then try to get a job that'll keep you safe in the job, right? And to change that mindset takes one thing. Second, I completely agree with you. I wish we are all encouraged to be more intellectually curious. And if you think about it, actually, we don't even need to rely on schools or educational institutions. The internet has democratized information. If all they need to do is just go to YouTube or go to Google and type anything about any person, any topic, you pretty much have so much content out there, right? And you can learn a lot if you wanted to. But I just think that most people don't have that curiosity. Were you always intellectually curious? Or how did you cultivate that?
I think everybody is curious, intellectually curious, and I think education makes us non-curious because we disallow random curiosity. For example, I've seen kids are constantly told that, oh, if you spend so much, you have so much curiosity about WWF. If you use that in your studies, you will score marks. You have so much
Mm,
curiosity about this actor. What if you studied that and you'll get more marks? So we have constantly dissuaded random curiosity, right?
mm,
Versus the pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of understanding, right? We discourage it, and almost shame people when they stray from their path of academics, right? Which
mhm,
unfortunately makes them generally dumb, because they may score marks but they have no clue how the world works, right? Like, how many people who earn a certain amount of income understand anything about crypto? Do they understand it? Do they really have, except knowing Bitcoin and Ethereum as the two things. Do you really understand? Do you have the curiosity to know what NFTs are? Like what is really going on? How and NFT should tell you how art business have been done and how rich people have managed to save taxes by doing art. Like, do you have curiosity to go down the rabbit hole? I think
Mhm.
I became this way because I was terrible at studies. I was terrible
Mhm.
at studies only because I could not memorize anything. I was not the guy who could memorize and score marks. I was always the guy who understood things. So I scored full marks in my practicals and vivas and all of that stuff. When it comes to written exams, I would just not have a recall value to write down the whole 5 pages of answers, right? Now, that allowed me to say, screw it, anyways, I'm not going to score marks. Let me just be curious.
Mhm.
And I have been curious about almost everything all the time. I'm curious about I'm curious about YC and I know every time I've met you, I've only asked you questions. 90% of
Yeah,
our conversations has been me asking you questions, right?
that's true.
And it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop just because I became some founder who's done so much of company and so much of this. It doesn't matter. My first task, even before we went on stage, I was asking you questions. Anu, what about
Yes.
this? What about that? What about this? Because that's what you will see. You will rarely see somebody who's done disproportionately well, who's not still like child asking questions.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a very important point, which is when you're young, the tendency is to actually, I need to know the answer to the questions. But actually, you'll realize, like over time, people who ask good questions are the ones that are actually scaling really fast, because it's not important to know the answer to all the questions. It's important whether you're asking the questions. And I think you mentioned this earlier too, which is we have so much stigma about asking questions because we feel like people are going to judge us. But who cares? You will never learn if you didn't ask the question, and you missed the whole opportunity to ask the question. So
So,
that's a very, very good point.
short term reputation loss by asking questions versus long term gain of compounding by asking stupid questions in long enough period of time. This reputation loss will not matter.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one last question for you. If you had to, go back to your 20s and knowing everything you've done, not that Kunal is old, he's still young, but what would you do differently?
That's a. Uh, I would be a lot more risk taking. I would more be a lot more shameless, be curious, push limits. There were a lot of times I was having inhibitions of not pushing the limits, asking, breaking things, taking risk, all of that stuff. I would break all
You
of
took
that.
risk. You started two companies. You mean to say you should take more risks?
I should have done a lot more. I think I see many serial entrepreneurs who've done so much more in their life. I'm 42, I've just done two companies. So I feel that I should have done at least 10x more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Anu, life is fragile and all of us can just disappear tomorrow, just like this.
True.
And the only way to feel alive is to create. And I was telling Anu the funny thing. I tweeted once saying that in India we worship Lord Shiva, we Lord Vishnu, which is God of destruction and God of sustenance. But Brahma is not worshipped, Lord of creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that came from this whole story where Brahma fell in love with his own creation, metaphorically, and therefore he was cursed to never be worshipped, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that we've dropped the generation to find the joy in creation. There is so much joy in creation, right? And I
Yeah.
believe that in a short period of time, when people get addicted to the joy of creation, right, and see their thoughts manifest into realities, right, the world will change, and the world is always moved forward through entrepreneurs. It's just that we have not celebrated them and explained them enough, because we always think of them as these quirky random individuals, which they are, but they are also these people who are constantly building and creating and in some ways imparting knowledge freely. And a lot of people are just not curious enough.
Yeah. No, I think that is spot on, which is, if you asked me, I would say I should have taken more risks. If anyone saw my resume, it reads like safe to safe to safe to safe. I mean, actually, to me, it didn't feel that way when I was jumping jobs from engineering to private equity to investing. But in hindsight, when I reflect back, I'm like, I played this so safe. I should have definitely, if I had to go back to my 20s, I would join a startup. That's what I'd do. And I would not have started in an established company. So if any of you are in the audience thinking of joining a startup, you should do that. Okay, one last question, because I think we have only like a few minutes left, and I do want to touch on this, which is you've actually talked about this. Like you mentioned that the government India, you say that you have to embrace capitalism, but probably it sounds more socialism. And it's not just the government, the entire mentality of the country. And you've mentioned about, but from here where we sit, the government has actually done a pretty good VC, like from the US. And of course, I'm sitting outside it, right? We admire the UPI, the GST reform, the digitization. India has actually done a much better job even than developed countries. But would love your reactions and specifically, like, because you mentioned about this lack of support specifically for entrepreneurship. What do you think the Indian government should be doing? What can they do more to support the growth of the economy? Is there anything they can do?
I don't think I've ever said the government has not done enough. I think the government is doing more than enough that they can. In fact, entrepreneurship does not happen with government support. Entrepreneurship happens when government is staying out of the way and letting entrepreneurship happen, right? And I think the best government is the one which is kind of governed the least to kind of let some of these things grow. The only thing I think, if I had one wish, I would say there are two things I would like wish government to do is like make people understand financial literacy a lot more from early days so that they understand the upside of entrepreneurship or owning equity or any of that stuff, right? So difference between PNL mindset to a balance sheet mindset, that is one thing I would figure out. The second thing is what I would say is that celebration of entrepreneurs, right? If we can celebrate these bootstrap founders who have created thousands of jobs, right? And all the people who like, unfortunately, Bollywood has made all the rich people to be some demons who have only schemed to become rich, and it worked out really well because the content was watched by masses, and demonizing somebody is a great way of getting people to love you by creating a common hatred. But I think
Yeah.
it's important for creating the culture of celebrating entrepreneurs and their job creation initiatives by making them feel special. Because what if all these entrepreneurs, and that's my biggest worry, feel that we should just leave this country because we are not the ones who are treated the best for doing this thing for the country, and everybody thinks of us some rich people who are trying to do the things, right? I think that mindset. And now that we have so many entrepreneurs who did not come from rich, like so many people did not have anything, right? Like, now that you've seen that, like, should we change that impression? It is not based on their control and their access and their contacts that they made it big. They've actually worked hard to kind of build this from the scratch. So can we create that brand image? So I think what I think we need to make entrepreneurship insanely sexy and
Yeah.
understood. Because if you just make it sexy, then we'll all start up and business will not scale, and all of us will have a nice cool title as founder in our LinkedIn, but multiplied by zero. The companies are not of any scale. So it's about making it sexy and making it understood that if you can really create it, let's make a job creation insanely sexy.
Yeah, no, great, well said. And I actually think it's only a matter of time. Because even if you look at the US, it took its own journey, right? Of course, we've had entrepreneurship for a very long time, but for the longest time, of course, there's Hollywood and LA, but a lot of the power was in the East Coast, in New York, in financial markets, and in DC. But honestly, in the last 10 years is where people have felt the power is sort of not shifting, but at least more balanced with the West Coast and with a lot of the tech companies and founders having done so well. So I actually think it's only a matter of time when all your companies do extremely well and we have more successes like Flipkart. I think that that's only going to inspire more people and people will celebrate entrepreneurship. Well, with that, I want to end this session because we're almost out of time. But thank you so much, Kunal, for taking the time to do
Thank
this.
you, Anu. Always pleasure speaking to you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Investment in securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing. Please read the risk disclosure documents carefully before investing in equity shares, derivatives, mutual fund, and or other instruments traded on the stock exchanges.